Good morning to the UK and good evening to Australia. My name is Joanne Holland and I'm the CEO of the Australia-UK Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to you, the audience, the speakers, and Dave Stewart, the Agent General of Queensland and Trade and Investment Queensland. We're delighted today to be collaborating with TIQ and the Queensland Government, who are sponsoring this fabulous event, which is focused on the opportunities in the game development industry in Australia. There is a specific focus on Queensland, who are currently providing the largest tax incentives. The past few years have seen enormous developments in this dynamic and fast-growing industry. It's reported that the global gaming industry is now expected to be worth more than $200 billion by the end of 2023. Microsoft's deal for Activision Blizzard is set to be the largest acquisition ever in the video game space and shocked the tech and gaming world when it announced it would acquire Activision Blizzard in a $68.7 billion deal. The interest in this market is not going to wane. Sparked by COVID in 2020 and supported by a growing change in workplace trends and valuations reaching dizzy heights, the market for game development will only continue to grow significantly. The Australian state governments hope to capitalise on this growth activity with the implementation of their digital growth strategy. Incentivised and attractive rebate schemes on offer, especially in Queensland, present significant opportunities to invest in this emerging and profitable sector. Today, we're very fortunate to have some very experienced speakers to share their knowledge on this exciting sector. Firstly, we'll be covering the size and rapid growth of the industry from Dr. Jens Schroeder. Then Dylan Miklaszek, who has been in the industry 25 years and leads the Queensland studio of a sizable game development international group, will share his experiences. Sanat Mishra and Tim Dawson, who are founders of a micro studio developer, will share their experiences and insights. And finally, from Screen Queensland, Kylie Munich, who's their CEO, and Jed Dawson, who's the Director of Games, will speak about the support they provide to the game development industry. There are multiple reasons to invest in the games development industry in Australia, not the least the fabulous lifestyle and weather in Queensland. Today, we'll hear about successful journeys within this industry and show potential investors the compelling reasons to invest in the game development market. Our first speaker is Dr. Jens Schroeder. Jens joined IGEA in 2019 after working as a lecturer for game design, manager of the SAE Sydney campus, head of academic studies for digital media at the Laureate Australia, as well as associate dean, design vertical for Torrens University. Jens is responsible for representing and growing the IGEA's development members by providing them with a voice to government and industry, working closely with the industry and Commonwealth and state governments. In the development space, Jens is also involved in gamification project that aims to engage students of low socioeconomic status with tertiary education, which has received a $50,000 grant from Optus as part of the Futures Makers grant. Jens, thank you and welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe, and welcome everybody. So what I would like to do is give a bit of context to the conversation today, and I guess answer the question, why video games? Well, video games are bigger business than film, music, and books combined. Video games also have the largest support base of any creative industry, with well over 2 billion gamers in the world, including over 1 billion in our region here in the Asia Pacific. And the sector continues to experience record growth globally. As a result of the COVID pandemic, millions of people were inspired to engage or re-engage with playing video games. After an unprecedented growth in 2020, a staggering 23% up from 2019, consumer spending on games has been resilient to the longer-term consequences of the COVID pandemic. In fact, Market research company Newzoo estimates the games market in 2021 generated a total revenue of more than 180 billion US dollars. That's a plus of 1.4% over 2020. So the positive growth trend that we've seen in 2019 has continued. And other reports underscore this very positive trend. Analytics company App Annie reports that worldwide consumer spending on mobile games alone reached close to $116 billion in 2021. And that figure represents an increase of 15% year on year compared to 2020. Globally, the market will continue with a CAGR of 8.7%. So that's between 2019 and 2024 to reach close to $220 billion US dollars in 2024, passing the $200 billion threshold in 2023. So let's have a closer look at Australia. Australians love playing video games. In fact, video games have arrived in the middle of Australian society. They're as Australian as a Bunnings sausage sizzle. Google that if you don't know what that means. The games market accounted for 5.9% of the total Australian entertainment and media market spent in 2020, and it's expected that that is going to grow to 6.8%, making games one of the sectors with the highest rate of growth. In fact, games rank as the second most popular medium in Australian households behind streamed media and in front of free-to-air TV. 2/3 of Australians play video games. 9 out of 10 homes have a device in which games can be played. The average age of video gamers is 34 years in Australia, and half of 47%, close to half of all players are female. So again, games really have arrived in the middle of society, and I, feel confident that that is also the case in other societies as well. But really to underline the point, just how ingrained games are in Australian society, and that is also reflected in Australians' ability to make games. We just looked at the consumer market. What about the production side? Well, to start with one very impressive statistic, between the 2016 and 2021 financial years, revenue has almost doubled for the local industry. The last 3 years have seen year-on-year growth over 20%. What does that mean? In the last financial year, so that's, again, that is almost a year ago now. That was in our survey we conducted last year. We highlighted that the income generated by Australian game development studios in 2020-21 was 226.5 million Australian dollars. That was an increase of 23% over the previous financial year. 82% of that revenue is generated overseas. And about, at the time of our survey, just over 1,300 people were employed in the industry. That number is likely to have swelled considerably. That was already an increase of 7% over the last year, but we also estimate that the industry is looking into hiring at least 400 people more. And if you do a bit of a LinkedIn scan, that number overall is now closer to 2,000. If you count everyone working in the industry, including marketing and so on, it's likely to be closer to 3,000. So in that respect, it's going quite well. It's a very young industry. 45% of studios are less than 5 years old, and 74% are working on their own IP. So that's Australia. Let's have a closer look at Queensland. In 2007, the Queensland game development sector was actually fairly large. Employment was well over 1,000. There were several studios with workforces between 30 and 200 employees that included such big names as Chrome, Pandemic, Electronic Arts, THQ, Creative Assembly, Sega, and so on. And then the GFC happened and led to a bit of a restructure of the industry. In the case of Queensland, and Australia as a whole, that meant that mobile games started to play a very prominent role. One of the best examples coming out of Queensland is Brisbane-made Fruit Ninja, which you are probably familiar with. That game had already achieved more than 1 billion, yes, billion downloads in 2016. It's an incredible number. That said, we're now at a stage where the Queensland industry is undergoing a great resurgence, and it's your opportunity to be part of it. The signs are very positive. Unpacking, for example, the Brisbane-made indie smash hit of 2021-22 and probably beyond sold 100,000 copies in just 10 days. And that was also not just a commercial success, but also a critical success. It took out numerous awards: Game of the Year of the Australian Game Developer Awards, Game of the Year as declared by Eurogamer, won an Innovation Award at South by Southwest. And also, and very importantly, it recently won 2 BAFTA Game Awards, Best Narrative and Game of the Year. So an incredible achievement. There are 2 team members here today that can talk about that in a bit more detail, and I don't want to steal their thunder, but it's definitely worth highlighting. Another example is Gameloft's Oregon Trail. This remake of the 70s classic sees players retrace footsteps of 19th century pioneers as they seek a new home in the Pacific Northwest. And transitioning this classic into a mobile format has won global acclaim. That game won, among others, most downloaded Apple Arcade game of 2021. It won the Mobile Excellence category at the 2021 Australian Game Developer Awards and a whole bunch of other awards, including Public Service Activism and Social Impact Game at the 2022 Webby Awards. But someone who is in a much better position to talk about this game and the history of the Queensland industry, because he's been there, is Dylan Miklaszek, Studio Director at Gameloft. So thank you, everyone, and over to you, Dylan.
Jens, thank you for that fabulous industry overview. I'm sure lots of people have questions to ask you. Now to hear from Dylan Miklaszek. Dylan has been in the video game industry for over 25 years. He's worked for Electronic Arts Canada, THQ USA, and Pandemic Australia. He's worked on multiple major licensed IPs, including FIFA, NHL, MLB, WWE, and Batman. In 2014, Dylan joined Gameloft, a French video game publisher based in Paris, founded in December 1999. Gameloft operates in 18 development studios worldwide and publishes games with a special focus on the mobile games market. Dylan is studio manager of Gameloft Brisbane and managing director of Gameloft Australia. So far, Gameloft Brisbane has developed several AAA mobile games, including Zombie Anarchy, Royale Rising, Ballistic Baseball, The Oregon Trail, and is due to release a new game on Apple Arcade in December 2022. Please welcome Dylan Miklaszek.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for that awesome introduction, Joanne and Jens. This is a really exciting opportunity to share with people what kind of great stuff's going on here in Australia, and in particular, Brisbane, Queensland. I guess sort of the way I'd like to describe what goes on here and why this is such a great opportunity is to sort of start off what I consider the key factors for creating and maintaining a successful studio. So I see those as being in no particular order: cost, function, an attractive location for the operations, talent, and culture. Culture of the studio, culture of the location, the country that people are living. So cost, Brisbane is an affordable city. It has a reasonable cost of living. It's significantly cheaper than places like Sydney and Melbourne, Vancouver, Santa Monica, London, Paris. So that means it's good for us as a company, and it's great for the people that work here as well. We've also got this federal, the federal tax incentive that's coming up. Starts July 1, which is an amazing milestone, an incredible achievement that applies to Australia as a whole. 30% basically refund on development costs. And then Queensland has added a 15% state incentive as well. So essentially, which is active now. 45% off the majority of our development costs is an incredible incentive, and beats even the offerings of places like Montreal and Quebec, which were the godfathers of the whole incentive concept. So from a cost perspective, it's right near the top of what the world has to offer. So, which is incredibly exciting. And being a part of that, lobbying the government, educating the government, working with the governments to achieve that has been one of the highlights of my career. It's fantastic. Then I go on to function. It's Brisbane is a they like to call it a big little town, but it's a big city, and it's got everything you need. We've got the broadband, we've got everything that any city needs, both to run an operation and for people to live in. I'm originally from Vancouver, and whilst Brisbane isn't as big as Vancouver, it's got everything that Vancouver has except maybe snow. It doesn't have a lot of snow here. In fact, they have no snow here, which is awesome in itself. I'll go into that later. In terms of things like time zones, we line up with the late afternoons on the west coast of the United States, early morning here, which is great. You can catch up the end of our day and the beginning of their morning. In Europe, we line up with our early evening to their early-ish morning. So it works out quite well for catching up with headquarters or other parts of the operation. And in terms of accessibility, we're direct flights to LA, to Vancouver, Asia, Middle East, and if you can handle it, there's even a new direct flight to New York from Sydney and to London. Of course, these flights are like 22 hours long, so it's not for the faint at heart. But it does exist, which makes it very accessible. Next is an attractive location. Brisbane is an awesome city to live in. Like I say, I've lived in a lot of places, Vancouver, Santa Monica. I've spent a lot of time throughout England and even Japan. And Brisbane is one of my favorite cities. I came here 17 years ago because my wife is from Brisbane. And we thought, we'll come back here and start a family and then, move to our next sort of adventure. And we haven't left because it's such an amazing city, which I'll move into then the culture side of things. It's not too big, it's not too small. Everything in Brisbane and Australia in general just has such a great balance. It's very much a work to live type of environment or type of mentality, which, I've sort of experienced a variety of those types of, lifestyles. United States, some would say, is a little bit more of a live to work, and Canada sort of in between. And I think the great thing about the work to live mentality is the creativity that comes from that, the happiness that people have. It's not to say that people don't work hard here. They work very hard, but they also, take very seriously enjoying life, I guess, and that life outside of work makes for happier people who are happier at work and are more productive and more creative. We don't really have a lot of things to worry about in Australia, that a lot of some of the other parts of the world have to deal with. We have very low crime. I think there's something for everybody here. It's very outdoorsy, very healthy lifestyles here. Lots of different sports. Here in Brisbane, we've got two sort of cities or areas, both north and south of the city, that are about an hour to 2 hours drive, that line the beaches. We've probably got 10 to 20 cities along the coast with beautiful, pristine beaches. Australia's done a great job to preserve the beauty of the natural beauty of their beaches and landscape. The sand is so soft that it squeaks, when you walk on it. I always thought that was amazing. And so it's just a beautiful place to experience, to raise a family, to go from to work, and even during the day, a lot of people here get out to the gym or do rock climbing or go for a run or a bike ride along the river. So I really do believe that it has a big impact on people's mentality and their mindset and their creativity. And then that gets to the talent themselves. We've got all levels of talent here. We've got very senior, mid-level, and incredible juniors. A lot of schools, great tertiary setup here in Brisbane, and we're constantly hiring enthusiastic, talented young adults into the studio, and it's just a great variety of people as well. Immigration process is relatively straightforward and allows us to bring people from all over the world, which really, helps the culture in our studio, which is incredibly important. And the people make that culture. So we can help steer it and whatnot, but at the end of the day, it's the people that make that culture, and having people from all over the world here makes for an incredible culture. And like Yen said, we've had some great success. We've had some fantastic success here in Brisbane, in particular in the 2000s to late 2000s, which is why I came to Brisbane along with my wife. But when we did, was to join Pandemic, starting a second team, which ended up working on The Dark Knight. And at that time, we were doing The Dark Knight, which was a huge game. And there were, 5-6 studios in Brisbane that had over 100 employees per studio, and we're all doing incredible things. So we were really on the cusp of becoming, the next Canada, the next Vancouver, the next Montreal, the next, the big thing. And then the GFC hit, and a lot of the publishers sort of shrunk to focus on, existing IPs and something that was, closer to home. So with these new incentives, both at a state and federal level, I'm so pumped that, we're going to get back to that very quickly, be able to, build on our existing ecosystems and, become the next big thing. That's it for me.
Dylan, thank you. I'm sure lots of the other states will be very jealous of your expose of Queensland and probably want to hire you. So we'll be asking you some more questions about Gameloft later, but thank you so much, Dylan, for speaking to us today. Now to hear from Sanatan Mishra and Tim Dawson. Tim and Sanatan are co-founders of Witchbeam Studios. They describe themselves as an independent games team in Brisbane, Australia. They say, we want to build the kinds of games we want to play and are committed to creating polished arcade-style experiences. In 2021, they won Game of the Year at the Australian Games Awards. Sanatan started his career in game development at Sega Studios Australia. After spending 5 years there as a game designer, shipping multiple large-scale console titles, he joined 2 former colleagues, forming the indie team Witchbeam, to create smaller, more focused and personal titles. He primarily handles design and business responsibilities for Witchbeam. And Tim is a multidisciplined game developer who spent his first 9 years in games as an animator at Australian studios, including Ratbag, Team Bondi, Pandemic, and Sega Studios Australia. As a co-founder of Witchbeam, Tim was responsible for art, animation, programming, and overall creative direction on Assault Android Cactus, and was the technical director on the studio's second title, Unpacking. Please welcome Sanatan and Tim.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so but I just kind of touch off on like kind of my path into starting a studio, and let not tell his side as well. I moved up to Brisbane to start to work at Pandemic actually, so on Dylan's team. So it all ties in nicely. And yeah, it's weird actually. I came to Brisbane and really liked it, and I've kind of been here ever since, and kind of stuck around even after the studio started having layoffs and shutting down. I kind of ended up at Sega, met Nat and Jeff, and yeah, went on to want to start a company here. So
my path is kind of similar. I lived around this area my entire life, basically between Lismore and the Sunshine Coast. That's kind of a 4 or 5 hour drive. And I started work in 2008 at Sega Studios Australia, which at the time was still called Creative Assembly, and linked with their sister studio in the UK, who make the Total War games, Alien Isolation, and other great games. We shipped some large-scale console games, some small-scale console games, and then eventually the GFC kind of rolled around and destroyed or dismantled much of the international space that existed in Australia, leaving very few opportunities, where a lot of the excellent talent in that 2008 to 2012 era left for international studios. But Tim, Jeff, and I decided to stick around and see if we could create more personal, what we're calling a micro studio style experiences with Witchbeam.
And our first title, I saw Android Cactus. We founded the team to make that. We brought Jeff on board when we were trying to get his advice on how to hire a musician, and he was like, "Dibs." But so the three of us started working in this game, and it was a kind of classic small studio sweat equity kind of deal where we just worked extremely hard. We covered every role ourselves, and it was a huge leap going from working inside companies to suddenly making a game and being responsible for everything, including like keeping ourselves fed. We burnt down our savings. But we pursued it, and I think the first thing that kind of helped us off the road was the Screen Australia grant that we had.
Yeah, the Games Fund from Screen Australia, where we received about $50,000 across the development of the game, which was a huge amount of money to invest at the time into the games industry. That was the largest kind of grant system that had been implemented, and now there's even more opportunities, which we'll get to as we go on. But the landscape was actually very different then as well in terms of investment, which I feel this webinar is kind of aimed towards talking to people who might be considering that. These days, the opportunities are a lot more prevalent, but back then there was very few people considering investment into the indie game scene or the micro console structure. So we were very lucky to do that with Cactus, and then it was successful enough that we were able to roll on and kind of continue working as independent creators who could self-fund and self-develop our own titles, which Tim, we want to get into how that turned out?
Yeah. So Cactus did actually quite well. We got speaking of the Australian Game Developer Awards, we won technical excellence in I want to say 2018, but I might have it, or maybe it was earlier. But we definitely it has its own trophy shelf, and we managed to get both Australian and international recognition for the game. There was a point where we were the highest rated Switch game until I think we launched in February, and until I think we came out of that maybe 8th out of the year. But the point was the game was really well received and opened a lot of doors for us, and was just a good experience, even though it wasn't a massive commercial experience, like commercially successful experience. But what it did do was it meant that the studio kept going. We were a successful startup, which is great. And it gave us a chance to take on another project, which in this case ended up being Unpacking, which I worked with Ren Breyer, and Witchbeam got to fund funded that game, we got another Screen Queensland, received a Screen Queensland grant early on, which really helped us hire another artist locally as well. We were able to bring in another Brisbane team member, and so we were able to make Unpacking effectively off what we had from the previous game, and Unpacking has now succeeded really well. As Jens mentioned, it hit its 100,000 milestone in 10 days, which is always a good metric for an indie game, and is continued upwards, which is great. And we've had a huge amount of international recognition, including the BAFTA Games Awards as well.
And while sorry, Tim. While Unpacking was self-funded, again, as Tim said, with what we made out of Cactus, and we were able to keep going and kind of roll into a slightly larger project in the second sense. It was also funded by Screen Queensland, who were generous enough to back it with the same size grant that we had for Cactus. And again, was quite crucial in that early stage of trying to figure out how much we could invest and what kind of scope we could target. I think it's kind of interesting in that the micro console space, the level of investment that's actually required is not necessarily that enormous to have a significant impact.
Yeah, I think for a small studio, that kind of like small, the kind of injecting money into the start of it actually has this huge outcome. Like it's the difference between a project kind of floundering and not being able to get off the ground and succeeding. Like both of our games, even though Unpacking has done considerably better, have succeeded and made a good return on what they cost to make. And the great thing about Unpacking as well is that when we expanded, we were able to find talent in Brisbane, and so we expanded our team from on Cactus we had 3 people, the 3 of us making the game. On Unpacking we ranged from about like a core team of 4 up to about like 8 people, kind of about 10 people that we were kind of working with, and almost all of them were based in Brisbane. And that happened because we got to start from something small. It kind of caught on. We could see that there was a potential there. People believed in us, including Screen Queensland. And from that, we were able to like push that momentum forwards and turn it into something that's, been really, really cool and standing on the world stage now. And it's like, I think that's a hallmark of micro teams, is that sometimes they can, it just takes a spark to kick off something much bigger, because the scale and the momentums are very different.
I think, as Dylan touched on earlier as well, the talent pool that's available in Australia, when we talk about working with people in Brisbane, is actually quite a diverse and kind of experienced talent pool here. Australia has fantastic tertiary education. It has fantastic schools and setup and government assistance for going to school and that kind of thing. So we have a steady kind of flow of people who are passionate and learning and wanting to get in at that kind of junior level. That works fantastic for roles like Dylan would have a lot of roles for that, I would imagine, at Gameloft, where people are coming in and learning the ropes and contributing more and more. But there's also just been such a rich history of game development in Australia, despite the crash in 2010 to 2012, where a lot of the international studios pulled out. They were still largely Australian talent working at those studios, and the people who did go overseas, a lot of them have come back, or a lot of people chose to stay and tough it out as remote work or doing their own thing. And that's just left this really interesting place where you can actually get a lot done in Australia. And I think that's kind of unique here for, a lot of what we have going on. Oh, did Tim disappear? Cut out?
I'm
Sorry, I thought you would cut in.
Yeah, no, I don't have much. I don't have much to add to that. I think it's I think like obviously I came from I grew up in Adelaide, and moving up to Brisbane, I was just like really taken by the work environment.
Absolutely, it's kind of a Jen. Are we out of time?
No, you can go for another minute if you like.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think some of this comes down to the way the culture and the lifestyle here, as Dylan said. There's a lot in the creative space that is essentially intrinsic motivation to do interesting stuff. And if you have a lifestyle here where you're happy and you're living in a place that is interesting, you can be. It's a lot easier to be intrinsically motivated, so long as there is the money there that's necessary to keep people, fed and housed and doing interesting things. So there's like a little bit from every space.
Well, look, thank you, Sanat and Tim. And I'm sure that we'll come back to this question of the money because that does support the industry. Our final speakers are from Screen Queensland, who have provided some of the money. Kylie Munich is the CEO of Screen Queensland and has more than 25 years' experience in film, TV distribution and development and financing. Prior to joining Screen Queensland, Kylie worked as a scripted sales and co-production executive for 7 studios, Senior Vice President for Distribution Asia Pacific for Sonar Entertainment, and Director of Drama and Comedy for Sky Vision in London. She also worked at Sony Pictures Television from 2005 to 14, running distribution for Australia and New Zealand. And then in 2011, she moved to London to become Senior Vice President, UK, Ireland and Africa. And Kylie's also worked for MGM International and Television and Film Bank Distributors. And Jed is Screen Queensland Director of Games and SQ Hub, and he's an adept end-to-end game maker from idea to prototype to development and launch. And Jed began his career at Half Brick Studios as a designer with team lead and product manager roles. And then he co-founded indie game studios, Affable Games, where he worked for 4 years. He's designed and launched titles, and his experience ranges from pitching and securing angel investment, competitive grants and tax incentives. So please welcome first Kylie, and she'll introduce Jed. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And you probably noticed in that long introduction about my career, no games companies. But since I've joined Screen Queensland, I've become an even greater and more passionate advocate for the games industry. I also come from a very passionate family of gamers, and we are surrounded by every kind of platform and device that you can imagine in our home. I have great respect for the games industry globally, and especially proud of what we have here in Queensland and what Screen Queensland has done to support the games industry here. We have actually supported game development since 2015, and we do that through a number of ways, through travel grants and funding, business support, mentorships, workshops and events. And we've really helped to support and build that local games industry that we know present a very highly skilled, commercially successful, and now globally recognised industry in Queensland. You've already heard about why Queensland and why Brisbane, because obviously it's awesome here. And I think just knowing that it was 26 degrees today and it's almost winter should be enough to convince you why you should be living in Queensland. But as a state agency, we are backing the games industry. We want to be part of your success. You see that Gameloft have really taken off since opening here in 2014. And we've worked with Dylan and his team to support 2 paid trainee placements this year, because we also want to contribute to upskilling and the future success of the industry. And I can't say enough about Witchbeam and Unpacking. We are so proud of them for all of their awards, especially the BAFTA, and so grateful that they choose to remain in Queensland despite all of their success. And we will continue to support them because they are original and fierce and creative, and we just love them. And in March this year, Screen Queensland very proudly launched the most competitive games incentive, state-based, in Australia. Our digital games incentive offers a 15% rebate for games with a minimum eligible spend of 250,000 Australian dollars. Now, Jed will go on to talk about more of this in detail. I just wanted to flag that this incentive has already attracted interest from studios who are planning to move here or expand here. And we're really pleased that not only Australia, but the world is starting to wake up about why Queensland and, why we love games like you. So with great industry support, enviable weather and lifestyle, great coffee, we certainly want to see more studios and more games experts moving to Queensland, Australia. So keep us in mind, think about why Queensland should be part of your future, and come and talk to us as a state agency. I'll hand you over to Jed, who is a proper games expert, to tell you a bit more about what we offer. Thanks, Jed.
Thanks, Kylie. I want to echo your sentiment about the great coffee here. I've had a lot of it today. But diving in, I wanted to give a little bit of background on me. I've been the games director at Screen Queensland for 6 months now, so pretty fresh. Prior to that, I've worked in the industry in Brisbane for 8 years as a game designer, as a really poor prototyping artist, and as a product manager slash studio co-founder, which kind of puts me across everything in game development that's not coding. That I leave that to programmers. But yeah, that has created in me like a real love of the Brisbane games industry, and a thankfulness that I have this role to help grow it and nurture it, and help our studios be the best that they can be. So there's a few things that I wanted to go over. Some of it will be echoing what you've already heard, so please bear with me there. I did want to talk about something that struck me when I first started here, and it's the enthusiasm that has, it was shocking when I came into the job, with the enthusiasm that I've seen from Screen Queensland employees. I've had a lot of contact with people in Treasury here, TIQ, just the pure enthusiasm for the games industry and the momentum that's been building, thanks to the digital games incentive, thanks to the federal tax offset, thanks to the 2 BAFTAs. It's really just quite an amazing opportunity, and I'm going to break it down from the top. So we have the federal tax offset, which comes in July. That's a 30% return on expenditure. You get the money every year. So every tax time you have to get sort of certified as a game studio, and then they give you that 30% at tax time. The 15% return that we manage at Screen Queensland, that is that is over a 2-year period maximum. You can be at any point in your development. So you can be a game that's been in development for 4 years and has another 3 years. You can be a development that's still starting up. It doesn't matter, as long as you are making an eligible game format, which is a entertainment game for a mass audience. It can be free to play, it can be premium, it can be live ops, it can be mobile phone, PC, VR. It just has to be entertainment games for a mass audience. So you project how much you're going to be spending over that period, and we calculate your incentive, and that's paid over that period. So it doesn't come at the end; it comes while you're developing your game, so that you can actually spend that to hire more people and make your game the best it can be. So that's the short of the 15% incentive that I manage. Going on, I was one of the recipients of the grants that Unpacking received back in the day. So yeah, I remember the impact that had on me and my career, and the ability that it gave us to make amazing games. So once the digital games incentive was out, I started working on the game grants, which is an expansion of that. It is prototyping and seed funding for game startups. So, but it's broken down into 3 different tiers. So you can actually apply for prototype funding, vertical slice or early access funding, or full development funding. So you tell us which of those targets you are going for, and each has their own caps. So prototype's 20K, vertical slice is 50, and full production is 90K, which is almost double what the original one was. So really expanding on the successes that we've seen from that program, and that is currently in process now. Kylie's mentioned the market funding that we have, which lets people attending GDC or GCAP in Melbourne, or in this case Gamescom this year, apply to Screen Queensland for travel funding. So internationally, that funding caps at 5,000 for an individual or 7,500 for a team. This year, Screen Queensland has contributed to the Australia stand at Gamescom. So Australia is the nation partner at Gamescom. So that is going to be a huge delegation of Australians going over to Kong in Germany to represent Australia and do business there. And that's just part of the momentum that we're seeing here. And the opportunity in Brisbane is huge. When the global financial crisis happened, the studios shrank, but there was a lot of supporting industries in place to primarily it's the universities. There are 5 universities here churning out hundreds of graduates a year for the and they're extremely high quality graduates as well, as Dylan has said. So there is a big opportunity to come and start something here, and not only start something, but really choose where you want that to happen. So not only do you have federal support with the tax offset, state with the incentive, but local councils are being incredibly competitive as well. So the Gold Coast is really on its way to being a startup hub for games. They've got some companies already settled there. Gold Coast Council has incentives that they can give. Sunshine Coast Council recently had a submarine cable laid down at Maroochydore, so they are well on their way to becoming a new Silicon Valley with 10 gigabyte internet speeds, like right there at the beach. They are constructing sort of like the city of the future right there. And they also are really keen to support sort of startups with cold hard cash incentives. So that's the kind of enthusiasm at all levels of government that you're looking at with Queensland. And looking forward, financially, Brisbane and Queensland is one of the best places in the world to make games. We easily compete with like the famously good places in Canada. And part of my big role is developing talent, creating pathways for graduates, and just nurturing through events, workshops, championing the industry wherever I can. I work really closely with TIQ. There's no one here from TIQ to shout their praises, but they have a lot of programs as well to support, trade missions. They have the ability to find new desks and spaces where you can sort of set up micro studios. They will bend over backwards to, make everything as easy as it can be for you to explore Queensland. Treasury, if you are really looking at quite a big investment into Queensland, they have invested in Queensland strategic investment funds, which is very competitive and has high ceiling on your expenditure, but is a huge opportunity if you can reach that. And that's kind of where I'm at. Looking forwards, it's all about developing those pathways for those people who want to get into the industry. I used to be a lecturer, and that's another one of my big passion, which is supporting people getting into this amazing industry in this amazing state. And that's me, I think.
Carly and Jed, thank you very much for that overview. I'm sure there'll be other questions on that. So we are open to questions. If you want to put the questions, type them into the Q&A. We can ask our panelists and speakers and see how they want to address some of your questions. But I suppose one of them I've got in the Q&A section is about the incentives and really what's been the take up, Carly and Jed, around the sort of incentive take up, and then what sort of is the process? I mean, where do people get started to try and apply for these incentives?
I'll speak to the take up, and sorry, I was very eager to answer that question because the take up was immediate. We saw such a positive response to this announcement. As has already been mentioned, it comes off the back of the announcement of the federal incentive and other states that have already been active in this place. But we decided to go to 15% because we really wanted to make a mark, and we saw huge interest. And I think Jed is probably overwhelmed from answering inquiries, but that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted people to take notice, and they have.
Great. What about, we might turn our minds to the education process and how we attract talent and what sort of qualifications is needed or are needed in the industry. How can we attract more women, and what programs are in place, and where do young people go to get the qualifications they need to be recognised by the smaller studios and the larger studios? Maybe Jens, you can speak to that.
Sure, I can start. I mean, with regards to attracting more women to the workforce, that's obviously something we're hugely in support of, because it also means games that have wider appeal. I mean, I mentioned before that close to 50% of gamers in Australia are women, which is fantastic to see. And I think this is something that needs to be communicated as early as possible. And I'm saying that as a father of a 5-year-old girl, that this is actually a legitimate career for girls to pursue. We recently were part of an expo in Victoria that was encouraging girls to consider STEM jobs in STEM-related areas, where we were present with some of our members to give talks as to what it takes and really highlight this as a viable career path, the more so in view of the growth of the industry and the transferability of your skills. I mean, when you think about it, making a video game includes every type of media there is, from animation to programming to design. There's the marketing of the whole thing. So those skills very easily translate into the industries. Some of the video game engines are used in car manufacturing or design, for example, Unity and Unreal, they're used in defense and so on. So it is a viable career, and it's certainly also a career for girls. I mean, I will say, however, like in terms of the history of the industry, of course, it's a bit of a challenge. It's a history of founding fathers. When you think about big names in the games industry, you have Nolan Bushnell from Atari, Ralph Baer, the inventor of the first game console, and so on. So there's this close association between a certain definition of maleness in technology and games that will sort of have to break up over time. And I think there's some very positive steps that are taken in that direction, also from the industry. I mean, you look at the likes of Nintendo, when they released the Nintendo Wii, all of a sudden, everyone was playing video games due to the low accessibility threshold. So it's something we really love to see, and it's not necessarily an easy process, but I know that the developer on this call, Dylan employs a range of female and gender diverse employees. You have Ren and Witchbeam, so they already make their presence felt. And it's something we're in support of, and we're trying to communicate this as a viable career for girls as early as possible.
Great. I mean, in terms of, sorry, Dylan's raised his hand. Dylan, sorry.
I was just going to throw in there that obviously the ultimate goal is, 50-50 men and women. But I'm very proud that Game Off Brisbane, we've reached over 30% of our staff are female, and it's awesome. And hopefully, I know one of our art director, Liz Ballantyne, does a lot of work in the community to, help women in a variety of different ways to build their presence in this industry. And like Jens said, it's super important to the industry. And we make games for everybody. So we need more women to help make games that appeal to everyone. Thanks.
Just on the point of Witchbeam and starting out as a micro studio, I mean, attracting talent. Are there any other incentives like apprenticeships or support that the smaller studios can get around attracting talent? Jed's put his hand up.
Oh, I had my hand up. Just more of an observation about women in games. I've worked as a lecturer for several universities and TAFE courses, and we need to go back sooner than hiring, because you get to the very first TAFE course, the very first diploma. There's maybe one woman in there in a class of 20. So it needs to go back even further when we're trying to address this problem. Going even further back, I know that maybe this one's for you, Jens, but because software coder isn't in the ANZIC tax code, apparently there are no jobs in software development. And so I think career guidance counselors tell students that you can't get any jobs in software development, which is something that I learned today.
Yeah, that would certainly do the students a bit of a disservice there. If I may just throw in one more thing, because I was talking about the founding fathers earlier, it's also the definition of what is a gamer that is often or still figured very prominently in a girl's imagination. And to illustrate that by an anecdote from the colleagues who attended this careers expo on the weekend, where someone's like, yeah, I'm mostly playing mobile games or The Sims. And it's like, yeah, those are just, they're games just like the sort of more traditional content we think of when we say video games, your shooters and all of that. But this is just as valid. And these games are made by professionals with highly specialized and transferable skills. So just because the dominant narrative of what constitutes a gamer doesn't necessarily include these games doesn't mean that this is not something you should be looking into. So that's what I mean with this sort of identity technology interface that over time was primarily coded as male, and it's slowly starting to break up. And hence also the importance of communicating that as early as possible when it comes to girls considering their career choices.
So Dave's got a question.
Thanks, Joe. And look, fantastic presentation this morning. Mine is a bit of an extension to the global talent issue. So I was really impressed to hear that, in a Queensland context, in an Australian context, we're very good at growing talent. But how do we attract international talent back into Australia, or is there a need to attract international talent? And I know Sarah Rose is online from the Australian government, she's running a global talent program. So is there a need to attract international talent into Queensland, into Brisbane? And Joe, I guess the FTA actually gives that opportunity for some of the changes that we're doing in a talent visa change in the long run anyway. So I don't know from the panel who might want to address that issue, but I think this discussion on talent is really key. It's certainly something that is preoccupying us in a trade and investment sense, but I also understand it, it's also an issue for other industries, other creative industries as well.
Well, I'll say something about the free trade agreement, and then maybe ask Jed and Jens to comment again. But, under the recently signed free trade agreement, it hasn't been ratified yet by the two governments, but there is free movement of people between the UK and Australia, and also the time aspect or the age aspect is now increased to age 35. So I think it's a question, and you know, you're right, Dave, about Sarah Rose's the Global Talent Program. There are people scouting out to look for talent in the UK to bring into Australia. So the time is right now. I think it's a question of one of the roles of the chamber is to get out there and to let people know, but it's also up to organisations in Queensland and Australia to reach out to the chamber as well to say, you know, where can we get this talent? How can we find this talent? And how can we bring it into the UK? And certainly Sarah Rose at DFAT is another source for that information. But, you know, perhaps if we look to Jed maybe to answer the question about sourcing international talent.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's about creating an attractive place to be a game developer. I think looking to Canada and how that is quite an attractive place to be in the games industry and how they got there. You know, their government supports and incentives are really well established and they have been for a long time, and they're thorough. So that encourages a culture of experimentation, making really cool stuff, and not just in one megalith studio, but in a lot of different diverse studios. So, you know, you have a lot of choice. You know, if I moved over to Canada and I was like, oh man, this game company sucks, I'd like to know that there are a lot of options for me and a lot of like really varied options that sort of align to the kind of games and the kind of work that I want to do. So I see, you know, government support and creating that culture where it's okay to experiment, where it's okay and you can wildly succeed in experimenting. You know, I want to see 10 more witch beams because that's the kind of place I would want to live and make games.
So Jed, thanks for that. I just want to tap back into Jens, because one of the role of IGEA, you do have a close tie with the various state governments and the Commonwealth government. What sort of lobbying can you do to create more incentives for international talent to be drawn into Australia?
Yeah, look, thank you very much, Joe. I guess wanted to echo Jed's point once more in terms of the importance of the lifestyle aspect ultimately. And I think Australia is a lifestyle superpower that has a very strong pull towards it. It's certainly something that Dylan has been talking to. And if Tourism Australia ever needs a new spokesperson, I would highly recommend Dylan because he's doing an excellent job of selling this place. But in terms of what we can do to attract talent, I mean, one thing that we've done is we have submitted an application for a so-called labor agreement for the Department of Home Affairs. A labor agreement is ultimately a agreement between a given industry and the Australian government about the very targeted import of talent. It is a very bespoke instrument that concerns just one industry and then comes with a variety of conditions. The advantage is that it doesn't have a knock-on effect on any other industry. So if you change a visa category, there is a knock-on effect for everyone. This one is very bespoke. And there are a range of things we wanted to accommodate in there. We've launched this a little while back. It was then held up by COVID. And currently, due to an election coming up, government is in caretaker mode. So we hope that once Australia voted in a new government, there is an opportunity for the new or old minister to attend to that, because it's up to ministerial discretion. But, you know, it includes such asks as permanent residency for every applicant, because that is currently not necessarily given under ANSCO codes. It's primarily for technical people with a technical background who are eligible for that. Artists, not necessarily. So, you know, it comes down to the ANSCO code, individual biographies. We want to make sure that there is consistency in that respect to ensure that people can stay in Australia for more than 2 years, in particular when you're a senior. You know, if you want to bring over your family, and the prospect is that you have to leave after 2 years, that might not be necessarily, very attractive. And some things that would somewhat reduce the administrative aspect of the procedure, which is not to say that Australia doesn't have suitable instruments to get people into the country. So that's something to consider as well. There are some visas that tick a whole lot of boxes in terms of people getting people into the country quickly, putting them on permanent residency, and so on. So, but I think there's an opportunity to broaden that a little bit further. And so that's one of the main instruments that that we've been advocating for.
Great, thanks, Jens. And Dylan, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, from my perspective, I think based on the incentives and the track record that Australia has had over the last, 10 years, but even in the last couple of years, we're really, demonstrating what talent is here and the opportunity, and you add the incentives to that. And I think that Australia is poised for massive growth in the video game industry. So therefore, we need all the talent we can get. We've got some great talent nationally. We want to grow a significant amount. So we need international talent as well. In particular, your senior roles, which can help mentor and grow the big numbers of young people that are coming out of university. They have, great enthusiasm, great talent, and they're very smart, but you still need some people with experience to help mentor them and look after them on their journey. So yeah, there's a couple of big reasons why we'll need that international talent. Plus, again, we make games for everybody. We want our games to, we have certain genres and stuff that we build games for, but at the end of the day, we want to make products that appeal to the widest possible audience. And that means we're all part of it. And so by bringing in people internationally, we get, different takes on things, different ideas, different perspectives. And that is a huge benefit to the products that we develop. And it makes for a great culture in the studio, we just love having people from all over the world. It's interesting to find out about these, some of the things that people do that you work with on a daily basis. So it just really helps build an amazing culture.
Thanks, Dylan. You mentioned a really interesting point there, and I'm going to come over to which Beam to talk about that, because you talked about senior roles and mentoring, and it was interesting that Sanat and Tim said that when they started out, they had to do everything. So there were games developers, guys, and then they had to run a business. And so what sort of support and help did you get there? And in the Queensland ecosystem to help you? Could you reach out to mentors? Did you go to professional firms? I mean, these were skill sets presumably you didn't have prior to setting up your own organizations. How did you deal with that?
I think, no, we reached out to anyone we knew. Like there were some good peers in the Brisbane scene that we definitely picked for advice, and other companies, both Brisbane, Australia, and internationally. Nat probably has the best perspective on that, though.
Honestly, it was more the school of hard knocks for us, because at that time the industry in Australia was almost exclusively large mega corporations, mostly foreign owned, other than Chrome, who employed about 500 people nationally. And when they disappeared, those skill sets and the people who had those roles also somewhat disappeared. So we went and we would gather advice from whoever we could. Luckily, in the years that followed, we had a lot of small to mid-scale successes. Companies like Defiant with Morgan Jafford, who is an absolute legend, helped us a great deal when we had business issues where we needed to look at a contract and say, is this legitimate? Is this interesting? Is this going to help us? But largely it was on our own. Nowadays, there's actually a lot more infrastructure for that. We have the co-working space in Brisbane, people like Denvo working out of there, offering a lot of advice to the newer, smaller independent teams that are trying to do things. He's been a fantastic resource for the local scene, local game developer meetups, and and studios, and of course, so much more support from Screen Queensland with regards to, different opportunities, which then creates this kind of infrastructure where people like John Cartwright came in and gave us a fantastic talk in conjunction with Screen Queensland on how to create pitch decks, which I then used to create a pitch deck and get a successful funding from Screen Queensland for my next project, which is called Tempopo. So it's kind of like this all-inclusive ecosystem now. But in the early stages, there really wasn't anything. And it's been fantastic to see that really evolve and grow. I did want to say before I get cut off and somebody else finishes up, back on the women in games kind of topic, I think you have to ask women in games. It's unfortunate that the entire panel today is all men. That's not actually intentional, Screen Queensland, and that the organizers did specifically ask if people. Oh, you're sorry. I meant because you were hosting.
The developer, yes.
The panel. Sorry, I figured there was a separation. Usually, at a panel, there's the panel and the host who's asking the questions and organizing things.
But right? I'm the one who supplies the money, so people want to know me.
That's true. That's true.
But you make a good point. You do make a good point.
Yeah. Sorry. The panel of developers. That's my mistake. I apologize greatly. But it is also you don't come from the game development background, right? So there's like a question there. People in games, how do they get that space? So it's an issue. And originally Ren was meant to be here, so I apologize for the fact that in the game development space we couldn't have women representing, but she was too busy this time. And I think you have to talk to them about what's actually going on in the education department and through to the hiring process and figure things out. And Sega Australia, we had 2 or 3 women out of 150 employees at one point, which was just, unacceptable level of things. And I'm glad that Gameloft is now over 30%, and I hope that we can keep improving that.
And on that as well, and I feel bad cribbing something that Ren has said, because this is something that she's made a point of, is that when she was saying in her career, one of the things that was very daunting was just looking around a studio and not seeing any women beyond a certain level of seniority. Because that's another thing as well. Like a studio that has a whole bunch of women in junior roles doesn't give you a sense of a career path, and it's like it's limiting its own way. It's not just raw numbers. It's also that ability to go like, oh yes, I see that women can actually be in like higher and more important roles.
Ali, you've got your hand up there.
Thanks, Joe. I was just going to add, Dylan mentioned, or somebody mentioned Liz Ballantyne earlier, who is a senior executive in the Gameloft team. Liz Ballantyne is also a member of Screen Queensland's Equity and Diversity Task Force. And Liz is very passionate about female game developers and encouraging more women to come into the games industry. And Screen Queensland takes it seriously as well. Our Equity and Diversity Task Force works across all of the screen industry that we support, but we're so grateful to have Liz there as the voice of games.
Thank you. And Dylan?
Yeah, Liz is a legend. Thanks for that shout out to her, Kylie. I was just going to add on the mentoring bit that I think there's a lot of great things happening where we're building more opportunities to help and facilitate, the smaller studios, because it's super important to the ecosystem. Gameloft, our studio here, we've got 60. We're trying to hire another 20 or 30. So we're sort of considered one of the bigger operations, but there has to be a variety. There has to be options to people. It depends on where they are in their career, where they are in their headspace. And so if we have these smaller studios because they want to do something in particular, or they just like the difference of the opportunity there compared to the bigger studios and what we're working on, maybe it's not what they want to do, or, you do something for a while, you want to change it up and do something different. And by having both the large, small, medium, creates this incredible ecosystem that people can move around in. And that's the ultimate goal. And to add to that, there's in terms of mentoring, IGEA has a mentoring program that people can apply for. I'm actually a mentor for a couple of people for the last 2 years. And it's a really cool experience, both for the mentee and the mentor, to talk about what's going on in their studios. I'm mentoring somebody who has a small studio, which is really cool because I've never, run a startup with it only had, 5 people or so. So I'm learning. So it's a really cool system that IGEA spearheaded, and there's lots of other things in the plans to do more of that. IGEA is all about supporting the industry, and they do great things. I'm actually on the board, so tooting our own horn, but it's a really great organization here in Australia that does incredible amounts to make it a better industry. And I don't remember anything like that in the States or in Canada when I lived there. I mean, they've got organizations, but not that work so closely with the companies in Australia and the studios and the people at all levels and all points in their careers. So big shout out to IGEA.
Thanks, Dylan. You've talked about the ecosystem, and that's come up a couple of times. And this is a question for Kylie. There is incentives. The incentives are currently for developers, as been outlined today. But what about other parts of the ecosystem? There's a lot around that support developers, like the marketing, the design, and Jennifer Tucker from Abbey in the Netherlands asked the question. What grants, incentives are there for those that support the developers?
I think that we've spoken to some of that, in that we've talked about mentorships, which is also supporting developers. We have offered business advice, so we've used business mentoring for games developers as well. We talked about the travel grants to attend conferences, and either virtually or in person. And maybe Jed, you want to speak to a little bit more of those other parts of the business about how we can work with games developers?
So the incentive, speaking strictly of the digital games incentive, that eligible expenditure can include support roles, so data analysts, marketing coordinators, QA, people who are working on the team to make the game a success. Eligible expenditure does not extend to money you pay Facebook for Facebook ads or something like that, but it is extended to everyone on the team who's working to make it a success and get that game out the door. The game grants are a lot more broad. They are, you are eligible to claim that if you are, trying to port a project. So porting is another big support industry that I'm really passionate about growing here. So in short, there is a lot of support networks at support there. At a federal level, we do have the EMDG, which is an export marketing development grant, if that's what the D is. And that is a 50% return on money you spend advertising your product overseas. So, and that's huge. That actually, has made the difference between a success and a failure of past projects for us. So, pretty well supported in a lot of the support areas over federal and state.
Thank you. Thanks, Jed. Now, just turning to the future, Witchbeam. I mean, where are you heading? What does the future look like for you? What are your growth plans? Are you looking to raise capital? Could you talk to that, really?
So we're in a so Nart's heading up a second team. We've got another project steering away at the moment. And I think just overall with the studio, we're not looking to like massively expand. Some studios are trying to ramp up to 50 people or something like that. But between Assault Android Cactus and Unpacking, we were able to bring in more people and I think make a game more effectively. And that's a path I see continuing. So I think we want kind of slow and steady growth, but like we want to grow carefully, right? I think that's the key part of our future.
Yeah, we've had a lot of offers and a lot of opportunities. We went to GDC just not too long ago and talked with so many companies. I can't even begin to name how many different people wanted to chat with us. It's been a wild year. But largely the offers have been, as you said, Joan, have been about expansion, investment, purchase equity versus publishing, all that kind of thing. And what we've decided for now is that we started out betting on ourselves as our creativity and our skill sets and what we could do when we had full control over something was what would set us apart. And that has worked so far for about a decade. And that's where we're going to stay. We're not really looking to double or triple in size, which was an opportunity we were considering for a little while, but basically try and keep things that are within our creative control and use our new position, which is such an enviable position to be in. I say that as somebody who's envied this position from other people in the past, where we can now use our finances and our success and our connections to solve problems that you can take out of the equation that normally pain you. Do you go to an event? Do you not go to an event? Now we can say yes. That's always yes, unless we don't need to. Do we hire somebody to help us with extra marketing support and release management and that kind of thing? Now it's always yes. So that's largely where we're at, is taking more of the rote things that would take up a lot of our time and our attention, and leaving us to focus on where we think we're strongest in creative pursuits.
Great, thank you both. And what about Dylan? I mean, what is the future for Gameloft? And
yeah, well, we were a one project team when we delivered the Oregon Trail. And based on the success of the Oregon Trail and ballistic baseball, combined with the tax incentives, both at a federal and state level, the company is attempting a significant growth. So we've already hired probably in the last year and a half, 30 people. And we're trying to hire at least another 30, if not 40, to build a third team, I should say, because Oregon Trail is still going with updates. And then we're working on a new project, as you mentioned, that will be released at the end of the year. And then we're looking to start another project as soon as we have a small team in place.
Great.
So very exciting.
Excellent. Well, we're nearly out of time. And before we finish this webinar, we'd like to hear from Dave Stewart. So I'm going to introduce Dave now, and he's going to close the webinar and this event for today. So thank you to all from the Chamber's point of view. Thank you to all the speakers. Now Dave will give a closing remarks. Dave was appointed as the Agent General for Queensland by Her Excellency Dr. Jeanette Young, Governor of Queensland, on the 13th of December 2021. And prior to his appointment, he was the former Director General of the Department of Premier and Cabinet and a member of the Building Board, Queensland Board, Trade and Investment Queensland Board, Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, and First Secretaries Group. He was appointed the Director General of the Department of Premier and Cabinet in 2015 till he retired in May 2021. Dave's got considerable experience in public service. He was the former Secretary for Transport for New South Wales, leading 27,000 people in shaping, planning, policy and delivery of public transport, roads and freight. And following a distinguished career in local government and engineering construction in Australia and the UK, Dave joined the Queensland Government as Deputy Coordinator General with the Department of Infrastructure and Planning, and he was responsible for delivering major projects. So today we're very lucky to have him in London as the Agent General for the Queensland Government and TIQ. So Dave, over to you for closing remarks.
Thanks, Jo. As you can see, I've learned a lot about gaming in the last 4 months, so it's fantastic to be here today. Firstly, can I thank the Chamber? So the Australian United Kingdom Chamber of Commerce for hosting today's webinar. Joe, what a great job you and Millie and your team have done. The Chamber provides us with a really tremendous opportunity for Australian and British businesses to stay connected and plugged in and to navigate our prospective business environment. So thank you again for hosting the event and also all of the bilaterals that you do. We really are very appreciative. I'd also like to thank our fantastic panelists today, Dylan, Tim, Sanat, and Jens, for giving up your very valuable time and providing those insights, but also, I guess, taking the time to answer a whole pile of questions from the audience and from people listening today. Kylie, the best CEO Screen Queensland has ever had. Thank you to you and Jed for your great insights. And again, Kylie, I think one of the great skills you do is your ability to attract investment and business to Queensland. And Jed, I'm really excited about the work you're doing in the games industry. The insights and experiences are just outstanding. Finally, I'd really like to acknowledge my TIQ team. Nikki, I know you're on board, and I know a lot of my team here in London and Stefan in Germany are also listening today. We're really here to assist anyone who wants to be involved in the gaming or screen industries, but particularly the gaming industry today. I've learned so much. Who can believe that an industry has 20% year-on-year growth? I mean, that is just outstanding. So it's something we need to be very focused on. Global talent is important. I've learned a lot about micro studios and investment. And, we talk to lots of investors every day, and we're very happy to continue to introduce investors to screen industry and games industry folk. Look, I can't speak highly enough about Queensland, and I agree we have the best sand in the world. So my home is just south of Noosa when I'm not living in London. So, I can only agree with those comments earlier. It is a great environment to work and to do business. You should consider creating, investing and living in Australia, and Queensland is certainly a good place to be. You've heard about the abundant opportunities in Australia for games developers, studio investors, and certainly our emerging talent. So please feel free to reach out to me or my team in London. We're here to help and to support. And Joe, all I can say is have a wonderful day ahead for everyone in the UK and Europe. And thank you for everyone in Australia. Have a great evening. And thank you for dialing in and joining us today.